Hello, my name is David Blitt, and I'm the editor of the New Westminster Times. And it is my great pleasure to have here today Nigel Biggar. He is an academic extraordinaire, a luminary in the academic world, an Oxford professor, and author of many books, one of which is this one, Colonialism, A Moral Reckoning. This book is causing quite a stir. Came out last year, I believe, and we're going to talk about the issues raised in this book today and many other things. So welcome, Nigel.
Thanks, David.
To Vancouver. And many people will no doubt know who you are. But for those who don't, can you give us a bit of a Nigel Biggar 101?
Yes, David. Well, in fact, I came to Vancouver first in 1977 at the age of 22. I just done my first degree in history in Oxford, and I came here to study theology at Regent College. And to cut a very long story short, that's when my academic career began. I went on to do a PhD at the University of Chicago, went back to Britain and taught in the University of Leeds, Trinity College Dublin, and ended up back in Oxford, where I was for 15 years until 2 years ago when I retired. And my field is Christian ethics. So that's in brief, that's my career.
So how did you hear about Regent College in the first place? Because for those who don't know, Regent kind of started as a very fledgling little school out of a converted frat house and some other makeshift buildings. And I know this because I went there in the 80s myself. But how did you hear about Regent College initially?
So David, I wasn't brought up in a Christian household. My father was post-Presbyterian and my mother was post-Methodist. But I became a Christian at my boarding school in England. I'm Scottish born, but I went to school in England at the age of 13. And toward the end of my university degree, I wanted to spend some time studying theology, partly to understand better why I believed what I believed, but also in those days, in the early 1970s, there was something of a national crisis in Britain with trouble between the government and unions, and also bloodshed in Northern Ireland. And I really wanted to try and understand what 2,000 years worth of Christian ethical reflection had to say to a national crisis. So I was asking advice from various people, and someone put me on to Regent College, where in those days, and I don't know if they still do this, but they offered graduate degrees to people who had first degrees in engineering or nursing or history, but wanted to do some theology, but didn't want to go into full-time Christian ministry, go back into their nursing or legal career. And I, at that point, had no interest in becoming a full-time minister, but I did want to understand my faith. And so Regent seemed attractive. And also my older brother had spent some years in Canada at the University of Guelph, and I'd never been to North America before, so it was an adventure too.
Right. Well, fast forward to 2025. Some people have described you as Regent College's most accomplished and famous graduate. And you've written a book which touches on, I must say, some of the most crucial issues of our time. There's barely an issue in society that is not, dare I say, intersecting with the colonial narrative as it's described, from resource extraction to the overdose crisis to residential schools to even to the military, trade matters, And today in Canada, we've had tariffs imposed by the United States. It's quite a day. So your book, which is some have described as sort of an apology for the British Empire to some degree. So given the academic prowess of your book, notwithstanding that, the president of Regent College decided to cancel your lecture. Now, this is quite a stir. So how does it feel to be canceled by the place where you set sail?
Yep. Well, I first got into trouble over my extremely moderate views, actually, on the British colonial record in 2017, when an attempt was made to cancel a research project I'd launched called Ethics and Empire. And the attempt failed, but the project was damaged because the leading historian, who was my collaborator, jumped ship within 4 days of trouble. And then I realized this was an incendiary topic. And then actually the book, David, was commissioned by one publisher, Bloomsbury, in 2018. I produced the manuscript at the end of 2020. My commissioning editor was delighted with the manuscript. He said it was one of the most important manuscripts to come across his desk in years. He said he was speechless with admiration for its rigor and comprehensiveness, and he predicted sales of up to 20,000 copies. 3 months later, the top of Bloomsbury wrote to me to say that they were postponing publication indefinitely because, quote, public feeling is unfavorable. That was a very depressing moment for me, but happily HarperCollins stepped in where Bloomsbury had stepped away, and the book was published. In fact, the first edition came out 2 years ago, and this slightly revised edition came out in 2024, that's right, last year. So I'm not unfamiliar with being cancelled. And David, Regent College I owe a lot to. I owe it the beginnings of my career. I also owe it my wife, whom I met there, and who was with me in Vancouver as we speak. So I bear the college no ill will, and I bear Jeff Greenman, the president, no ill will. I've never met him. But I object very strongly indeed to the fact that this talk, which I was invited to give a year ago, was cancelled within 3 weeks of my coming here, and the explanation given for the cancellation to me was economical with the truth. I've gathered why the decision was made by the president, and it's typical of decisions that many leaders of institutions tend to make these days, but they come under pressure from aggressive, noisy people who, let's be clear, they're not protesting about the fact that they're being made to listen to the likes of me. That's not the point. They're protesting that anyone else should be allowed to listen to me, because no one's forcing them to come to my. No one was forcing them to come to my lecture, and yet again, the leadership, in this case at Regent College, caved into that and cancelled my lecture at short notice. Mm-hmm. And I think my own view is that institutions have, quite apart from a Christian duty, but also a civic duty to provide places where it is possible to have, in good faith, discussions in which reasons are given and taken, in which positions are put under critical scrutiny on important public issues, because that's how we get to know the truth together. Because often our grasp of the truth is limited, and we get to refine our grasp of the truth by engaging with each other critically. That's what Regent should have done, but it failed.
So let's talk about what is often referred to as the decolonial mindset, or the decolonial narrative, the concept of decolonization. I'll just give an example. We're called the New Westminster Times. We live in New Westminster, the first capital of British Columbia, that was named by Queen Victoria, and it was been known as the Royal City for over 150 years. Well, the progressive city council was seeking to remove the moniker of the Royal City and scrub the city's logo, which is a crown. And there is this obsession with decolonizing. And it's as if the decolonization is like a psychological or a sociological phenomenon. It's as if this movement has taken on a life of its own. And you are on the other side of that, talking about history. How is it that this narrative has taken such a strong hold across the West?
That's a really, really good question, David. It's taken a very strong hold, I think, across the English-speaking West. And there's a clue to the cause. In part, it's the cultural influence of America.
Right.
So what's happened? Decolonization has been present in, post-colonial studies, and the notion of decolonization has been present in universities, often at the margins. But what happened in 2020 was that George Floyd, the African American in Minneapolis, was killed by the police, and the Black Lives Matter movement experienced an upsurge, and that upsurge in America was exploited by professional anti-racist groups in my own country, Britain. You must speak for Canada. So much so that, for example, there was a Black Lives Matter protest in England, where a young English woman was holding a placard which said, "Disarm the police." Well, in England, our police aren't armed.
Right.
So this woman had forgotten that England is not America. So I think what's happened, actually, certainly in Britain, and I think elsewhere too, is we have all, or some of us, have imported radical race politics from America, from the United States, where you have this narrative of oppressor and oppressed, colonial and indigenous, white and black. It's really a very divisive narrative. And those who think that decolonization, or say that decolonization is going to help, as it were, reconciliation, are, I think, deluded, because the whole idea is premised on a very stark opposition, which is quite unhistorical, because coloniality was not just about opposition; it was also about negotiation and measures of assimilation, and often mutual cultural fascination. But the story about European colonization, like the British colonization, was that it was a litany of racism and oppression and exploitation, which, as I say, is historically untenable. And that's one of the reasons I wrote this book, because most people, quite understandably, haven't spent much of their lives reading about colonial history. I happen to have done that. Most people know nothing about it. And one reason why the decolonizing narrative has got traction in our institutions is that people in charge of institutions, university educated though they might be, intelligent though they might be, know nothing about history. And they're disposed to believe the cartoonish account that the decolonization narrative pervades.
Yeah.
So I think the reasons for the dominance of the narrative are various, but it's partly the importation of American race politics, partly ignorance of history, and also I think on the part of white elites, an absolute terror of being called racist.
So, Nigel, you referred to, I think you said, cartoonish history. May I suggest that beyond cartoonish, there's made-up history. And I'd like to, mention an example from British Columbia. A lot of people will go out there and say that the smallpox disease was intentionally spread by the colonial government as a means of exterminating by germ warfare the Indigenous people of British Columbia. This narrative has been completely debunked, and there's no evidence to support that it's true. The iconic Hudson's Bay blanket is now associated with genocide. So how is it that credible or apparently credible people will support these narratives when they know that there's really no historical evidence to back them up?
So, David, first of all, I'm interested to hear about this charge of intentional genocide through biological warfare. I've read about debates on genocide in Tasmania, for example, which has been claimed to be the only real genocide within the British Empire, and I discuss that in my book, and I decide, even alongside some left-wing historians of some prominence, Henry Reynolds, in terms of Tasmania, that what happened in Tasmania is not correctly described as genocide. But of course, the charge of genocide is a very emotive one, and for political purposes, some people want to stick the label on all sorts of things that are alleged to have happened. In North America, I think there was one occasion, maybe two, during wartime, when it's possible that the British may have, certainly considered using infected blankets to decimate the enemy. There's no certain proof it actually happened, and these are only isolated instances. The spread of disease in North America brought by Europeans is widely recognized to be devastating. No one intended to bring the disease to these shores any more than Indonesian fishermen intended to bring smallpox to the Northern Territories of Australia, or any more, I think, than the Chinese intended to spread COVID. At least I assume they didn't intend to spread COVID. People carry disease inadvertently, and the impact on native peoples was devastating. I'm not surprised to hear that some people have wanted to fabricate the story of intentional genocide through the spread of disease by the Hudson's Bay Company. Having encountered the way in which some people, for political purposes, abuse history over the last 8 years, I'm not surprised. One thing that has become very clear to me over the years is some people, when it comes to history, their abuse of it is absolutely unscrupulous. I mean, they don't care about evidence, so long as it's useful in advance of in promotion of their political purposes. They just don't care. But to your question, why therefore are these claims widely, not merely widely spread, but widely believed in spite of evidence? And the same, of course, goes to the very controversial matter of what happened in the residential schools in Canada. Exactly the same. Why are they believed? Why are they not counted? I think, again, it's because a lot of liberal folk, liberal white people, are absolutely terrified of being considered to be racist. They don't dare challenge what activists claim to be true. I think it's a dereliction of moral duty, frankly. Also, I suppose, busy people in charge of the Hudson's Bay Company, directors and boards of trustees, they don't have time to read history. So when these things are claimed, they cave in. Quite why so many people who are paid very large sums of money to run institutions are so lacking in backbone is a real puzzle, but it's very widespread, very widespread. But it is demoralizing because this way, fabrications, untruths, even lies about the past have become entrenched.
Yes. So, just shifting gears a bit, why don't we talk about statues? It seems like statues, names of schools, monuments, names of towns have become like the battleground for the decolonial juggernaut, let's call it that. And I'll just use an example of a small town near Vancouver. We're in Vancouver, BC, and up the coast is a place called Powell River. And it's proposed, the First Nation has asked to change the name because of a fellow named Israel Wood Powell, who was the first Minister of Indian Affairs for British Columbia. So what's happened is that anyone who dares to oppose the name change is smeared as a racist. And now you have this battle royale playing out in this small town, and it's captured attention. What is about these monuments, these place names? Why is it people will say, well, why do you bother fighting this? Why don't you just let the name be changed? Why do you care so much? Is this a space where we should be fighting?
I think so, David. I mean, the statue closest to my home in Oxford, England, is the statue of Cecil Rhodes. On Oxford's High Street, there's a building owned by Oriel College, and if you really strain your neck, if you're really keen to be offended and strain your neck, you can see the small statue at the top of the facade of the back of Oriel College. And since 2015, off and on, intermittently, a few hundred, mainly students, some professors, have been clamoring for the statue of Cecil Rhodes to be taken down because he was South Africa's Hitler, because he perpetrated genocide, because he was responsible for concentration camps in South Africa, etc. And I early on opposed the removal of the statue, partly because all those claims against Cecil Rhodes are absurd, have no historical basis. Not that matters to the activists. But why does it matter? For me, it matters because what's being done is that the cartoonish story about British Empire, about Canada's colonial history, and let's just recall, without a colonial history, Canada would not exist. Canada is a creation of colonial history. This cartoonish denigration of colonial history is being projected onto Rhodes's statue. It's being projected onto this place name, and therefore the idea is that for us, for Canadians, to exorcise, to purge themselves of their systemic white supremacist racism, we need to remove these colonial names and erase colonial history, because that was all about racism and exploitation and oppression, so they say. So it's because of what these colonially related names are made to signify that we're supposed to get rid of them. But the truth is, I have no idea about this particular man, Powell, what he did. But of course, you've had the pulling down of statues of John A. Macdonald, who was the founder of the state of Canada. And I've read enough about John A. Macdonald to know that, again, the stories about him are unfair and to some extent untrue.
Yeah.
So what's at stake really is faith in the Canada that was built and which we all, you all inhabit, and why should you have faith in Canada? Well, Canada is one of the most prosperous and liberal countries on earth, and according to the World Values Survey 2023, you're also one of the least racist countries on earth, like Australia, like New Zealand, like Britain. It's not a coincidence that all those parts of the British Empire are both prosperous and liberal and minimally racist. We all share the same legal and political traditions. So actually, what we built, particularly at a time when there are illiberal countries, certainly in Moscow and in Beijing, illiberal regimes who are threatening liberal democratic countries, it's really important for us to retain faith in our own liberal countries, which is why it is so dangerous that in Canada in particular, more than Australia, more than Britain, the liberal culture where we can share our ideas about the truth about the past and make them accountable to the give and take of reasons. It's really important we have that so we can get near the truth. But from my impression of Canada right now is that the freedom to have those kind of discussions in public is much more constrained and crippled by fear than in any of the other English-speaking countries. And that's for Canada, that's really dangerous.
Yes, especially since we're supposedly becoming the 51st state any day now. And this is, a theme that is touched on in your book. It speaks to that because we've lived under the Justin Trudeau doctrine of a post-national state. There's been this national outpouring of shame over residential schools, flags flown at half-mast, churches burned across the country. And this phrase, so-called Canada, or let's call it Turtle Island or something else. So what kind of a corrosive effect does it have on sort of a national identity for a country, Britain, Canada, which are related, to not have the freedom to speak up against this narrative? It has an effect on the relationship we now have with the United States. They could be looking up here and saying, well, why are you bothering to defend your country since you think it's a genocidal colonial enterprise that is, tantamount to the Holocaust?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason I wrote the book, David, was because I feared the corrosive effects of this decolonizing story. In 1976, there was a book written by a Baghdad-born Jewish historian called Eli Kaduri, who eventually made his life and career in London. And he published his book called The Anglo-Arab Labyrinth. And this was about the question of whether the British, during the First World War, had promised the Arabs the land of Palestine for an Arab state, and had subsequently betrayed the Arabs by allowing Zionist Jews to immigrate to Palestine. And Kaduri, it's a very dense book. I wouldn't recommend it unless you're really keen. But I read it, and I think his argument is plausible that the British did not promise Palestine to the Arabs. The British, in fact, created two other Arab states, namely Jordan and Iraq. But Palestine they allowed Zionist immigration into. But the point was this, that Kaduri wanted to sort this question out because the British Foreign Office had come to believe that Britain had betrayed the Arabs, and what he nicely phrased, the canker of imaginary guilt. The canker of imaginary guilt was infecting and distorting British foreign policy. And so my concern in writing this book really was to try and immunize the British and the Canadians and the Australians and the New Zealanders against the canker of imaginary guilt. Let me be clear, in my book, and you can perhaps confirm this, I don't pretend that the British Empire didn't preside over some very bad things. 150 years of slavery, the inadvertent spread of devastating disease, etc. And if anyone doubts, if anyone thinks that I whitewash the colonial record, or that I'm a simple apologist for the British Empire, then I recommend they look at page 276, where there's a list of the bad stuff that this 400-year-old imperial state presided over. But frankly, name me any 400-year-old state which hasn't presided over similar things, regardless of the skin color of the people running it. So I don't pretend that it was all hunky-dory. It wasn't. But the story that it was nothing but racism and exploitation and oppression is just not true. To take one example, or take two examples, just to mess up the black and white narrative. First of all, yes, for about 150 years, from 1650 roughly till 1807, some British were involved in trading African slaves from Africa to the Americas, and that was lamentable. But by the way, slavery was a universal institution practiced by the Comanche in the southwest of what's now the U.S. in the 1700s, the Haida and the Nootka on the coast of this part of North America also engaged in slave trading and enslavement. I was reading yesterday about an incident in 1830 when some Nootka enslaved some British people off a ship on this coast. So involvement in slavery wasn't a peculiarly British thing. Everyone was doing it. So yes, that was very bad. But on the other hand, the British were amongst the first peoples in the history of the world to repudiate and abolish slave trading and then slavery. And then the British used their imperial power for another 150 years to suppress slave trading and slavery from Brazil, across Africa, across the Indian subcontinent, Malaya, to New Zealand. So the truth is that the British Empire contained both slavery and anti-slavery. And the anti-slavery was based on the Christian assumption that all people, regardless of skin color and race, are equal under God. That's what makes slavery so bad. So no, the British Empire was not premised simply on white supremacism and racism. It was also premised on basic human equality regardless of race. And in fact, there's a book I read about the Canadian Parliament in the late 1800s and 1880s, when one MP would stand up and say that there's no point in trying to educate Indigenous Canadians, Indians, because they're naturally inferior. It's a waste of time and money. Whenever that happened, another MP would stand up and say that's un-Christian, it's un-British, and it's not just. So you have within the empire vying views of native peoples, not simply racist but also anti-racist ones. And so I'm an apologist for the British Empire insofar as I want the whole story told. I want the liberal and humanitarian and egalitarian elements of the empire, which were really important and grew in strength as the empire developed, so that close to the end, in 1939, the British Empire committed itself to fighting the massively murderous racist regime in Nazi Berlin, which is why if you go to places like Sicily in the south of Italy, and you're driving just southwest of Mount Etna, and you're going from Regal Buta eastwards to Agira, on the left-hand side you'll see a cemetery, and you get out of your car, you'll find yourself in a Second World War military cemetery filled with Canadians. And there's a headstone. If you walk around the headstones, you'll come across one which belongs to a certain H.R. Anderson from Winnipeg, aged 28, killed on the 18th of July 1943, and his epitaph includes the inscription, and I notice it because it's quite rare, Anti-Fascist fighter.
Right.
And Anderson, God bless him, was a volunteer. He wasn't compelled to sign up, but he volunteered to fight fascism. And who called him? The British Empire. So at the end toward the end of its life, the empire risked its future on fighting Nazism. And surely that tells us something about the character of the empire, that it wasn't simply racist or oppressive or exploitative. It was sometimes the opposite.
Yeah, so this quest to find balance and in the historical record and balance the perspective from these extremes of genocidal Nazi-style colonizing force, so that this painting the British Empire in the same color as the Nazis. So when someone like yourself, or perhaps even myself or others who wants to add balance, they're painted as people who are diminishing and denying the abuses that Indigenous people have suffered. And I myself, in the Canadian context, when the Truth and Reconciliation report came out about residential schools, I was gutted by what I read. I was very moved, and I was a lot of the revelations in those reports, I thought it really was shameful for Canada to do such a shabby job. The idea of education itself as being cultural genocide, I never bought into that. But it seemed that the schools were poorly funded. There was disease. They weren't run well. There was abuse, and they were given over to the religious orders to run, and there wasn't the checks and balances in the system. Yep. And it was something that had to be acknowledged by the country, and Stephen Harper, the Conservative Prime Minister, apologized for it. But since that time, when I read that report in 2016, something dramatically different has happened. We've gone from Truth and Reconciliation to Decolonization. So it's as if anyone who speaks is trying to sort of defend colonial culture, like a statue or a name of a figure from early Canadian history, is branded as a racist white supremacist.
Yes, yes.
How did we get here?
Yes. Well, I mean, part of the reason for defending what is defensible in colonial history and Canada's colonial history is, part of it is a matter of doing justice to the dead. Right, so John A. Macdonald is reviled nowadays, I understand, but actually, with regard to Indigenous peoples, I think his record is extraordinarily humane. So, for example, in the 1870s, Macdonald observed what was happening in the United States. And what was happening in the United States was that settlers were streaming across the Western Plains into Indian territory, where there was no effective government. And so the clash between settler and Indian was completely unmoderated, and it was violent and brutal, lots of massacres of Indian people. And Macdonald resolved that that would not happen in Canada. So that's why he sent out emissaries to native peoples out west to make treaties. And you have the numbered treaties. That's why he sent out the Northwestern Mounted Police, partly to be in place to mediate between and arbitrate between settler and Indian, not simply in the settler's favor, but to see that fairness and justice prevailed, and also to stop the importation of whiskey from the United States, because the impact of alcohol on Indigenous people was devastating. And he also extended the very successful program of vaccinating Indigenous Canadians against smallpox out west. And in 1882, when the effects of the collapse of the bison population on which native Canadians had depended for their livelihoods and their survival were being felt, and famine was spreading amongst Indigenous peoples in the West, the Ottawa government under Macdonald spent more on Indian affairs than the government spent on defense, spent more on Indian affairs than the government spent on the administration of justice, and more on Indian affairs than it spent on civil government. And according to Jed Martin, a professor of history at the University of Edinburgh, now retired, the response of Ottawa to famine among Indigenous Canadians was impressive and humane. So partly, one reason we want to fight for the truth about history is to stop the defamation of the dead, but also because the decolonizing story does corrode faith in everything's been built in Canada.
One of the things you points you make in your book is the word colonialism itself is problematic because it implies some kind of a cookie-cutter grand plan.
Exactly.
That has been rolled out and applied the same way everywhere, and it's a strategy that was just universally invoked to wipe out Indigenous people across the globe. I know here in British Columbia, and there are hints coming out of the provincial government that, oh, hey, everybody, stop using the word British, just say BC instead. So this idea that we would apply the same kind of thinking to every single area. I know British Columbia was very different. It joined Confederation quite late, and the governor, James Douglas, was part black. He was married to an Indigenous woman, and he worked very hard to stop the basic American invasion of British Columbia during the gold rush. He bent over backwards to try to stop that. He wasn't able to ultimately. So what do you have to say about that? How is it that this kind of generic term, colonialism, has even been allowed to take hold?
So this is really goes back to the kind of cartoonish distortion. Because the thing about cartoons, it's all black and white, it's all melodrama, goodies and baddies. Which, a moment's reflection would tell us it isn't true to human life, and in the present it wasn't true to the past either. So I try and avoid talking about colonialism, although my book does have the word on the front cover, simply because that's what we're talking about. But in fact, no one woke up one sunny day in London and said, oh, let's go and conquer the world and be nasty to non-white people. The empire grew up for all sorts of reasons, different places, different times. And as I said, sometimes it was about enslavement, Other times it was about the emancipation of slaves. It was all manner of thing, which is why trying to reduce it to this litany of racism and oppression and exploitation, it's just not true, and it's not actually plausible in terms of the way human life is. I mean, I speak for myself. Well, life is messy. It's got good bits and bad bits, and the British Empire and Canada's colonial history is no different. So I'm not apologizing for the British Empire or Canada's colonial history in the sense of pretending it was all good, but I do want the good bits, the noble, admirable achievements of Britain and its empire and of colonial Canada to be remembered and to be admired and to be communicated to future generations, so that Canadians, while lamenting the bad things in their past, can admire and seek to emulate and preserve the good things, because there certainly are good things.
Well, I feel better already.
Good.
So the book is Colonialism, A Moral Reckoning, notwithstanding the problems with that word itself, but highly recommended, just chock full of deep history, an engaging read. Thank you so much, Nigel, for being our guest today. It is much appreciated.
Thank you for having me on.